They thought I was just the caregiver until the lawyer read the last page. I sat in the corner of the mahogany-paneled conference room, my hands folded in my lap, watching the Ashford family arrange themselves around the polished table like pieces on a chessboard. They moved with the practiced precision of people accustomed to wealth and power. Their black funeral attire expensive enough to feed a family for months. Maria, isn't it, the eldest son, Jonathan, glanced in my direction with the kind of polite dismissal reserved for service staff. Thank you for coming. I'm sure Father appreciated your assistance during his final months. Assistance. 3 years of caring for Theodore Ashford, and I was reduced to assistance, as if I'd been nothing more than a hired hand who'd helped him with his medications and made sure he didn't fall down the stairs. Yes, sir, I replied quietly, because it was easier than correcting him. Easier than explaining that his father and I had spent countless hours talking about everything from his childhood in Boston to his fears about dying alone. The lawyer, a silver-haired man named Charles Whitmore, entered the room carrying a thick leather portfolio. He surveyed the assembled family with the neutral expression of someone who'd delivered both good news and devastating revelations in equal measure over his long career. Good afternoon, everyone, Whitmore said, settling behind the desk. I know this is a difficult time, but Theodore was very specific about wanting his will read promptly after the funeral. Jonathan's wife, Patricia, adjusted her pearl necklace with manicured fingers. I assume this is fairly straightforward, Mr. Whitmore. The estate goes to the children, with appropriate provisions for grandchildren and charitable bequests. Theodore's will is comprehensive, Whitmore replied carefully. He spent considerable time crafting it, particularly in his final year. I thought about that final year, about the long afternoons when Theodore would sit by his bedroom window, dictating letters and making phone calls to his lawyer. He'd been secretive about it, asking me to give him privacy during those conversations. But I'd assumed he was simply updating standard provisions or adding new charitable donations. Before we begin, Whitmore continued, I should mention that Theodore left specific instructions about how the will should be read. He wanted certain sections delivered in a particular order, with explanations for his decisions. Jonathan's younger brother Michael shifted impatiently in his chair. Explanations? Father was always direct about his intentions. I can't imagine what would require explanation. You'd be surprised, Whitmore said, opening his portfolio. Theodore had very strong feelings about family, loyalty, and the true meaning of care and devotion. The family exchanged glances, perhaps sensing that this reading wouldn't unfold as predictably as they'd expected. I remained in my corner chair, trying to make myself invisible, wondering why Theodore's lawyer had insisted I attend at all. Let's begin with the standard provisions, Whitmore said, withdrawing the first document. To my son Jonathan Ashford, I leave my collection of rare books and the sum of $200,000. Jonathan's face showed surprise rather than satisfaction. $200,000 was substantial, but for a man worth tens of millions, it seemed almost modest. To my son Michael Ashford, I leave my vintage car collection and the sum of $200,000. Michael leaned forward. What about the house, the business interests, the investment portfolio? We'll get to those, Whitmore assured him. To my daughter-in-law Patricia Ashford, I leave my late wife's jewelry collection, with the exception of her engagement ring, which is addressed separately. Patricia's hand went instinctively to her throat, where she wore a simple strand of pearls that paled in comparison to the elaborate pieces Theodore's wife had owned. To my grandchildren, I establish educational trusts of $50,000 each, to be used for college expenses and professional development. The family members exchanged looks of growing confusion. The bequests were generous, but represented only a fraction of Theodore's wealth. Where was the bulk of the estate going? Now, Whitmore said, his voice taking on a more formal tone, we come to the more substantial provisions of Theodore's will. Along with his explanations for these decisions, he pulled out a thicker document. This one, bearing Theodore's personal letterhead. Theodore wrote, to my family, who I know will be surprised by the contents of this will. I want to explain that my decisions were not made in anger or spite, but from careful observation of who truly cared for me during my final years. When I was most vulnerable and most in need of genuine compassion, I felt a chill of premonition, sensing that Theodore's words were leading somewhere I hadn't expected, somewhere that would change the careful dynamics of this family gathering. For 3 years, I lived with the knowledge that my body was failing, that my independence was slipping away, that I would need help with the most basic functions of daily life. During those years, I learned a great deal about the people in my life, about who they really were when the facade of social obligation was stripped away. Jonathan interrupted. Father was clearly not well toward the end. His judgment may have been compromised. Whitmore looked up from the document. Theodore anticipated this concern. He had his mental capacity evaluated by 3 independent physicians over the past year. All confirmed that he was of sound mind and fully capable of making legal decisions. He returned to reading. I learned that blood relation does not guarantee devotion, that legal obligation does not ensure genuine care, that wealth cannot purchase authentic love or real companionship. The room grew quiet except for the sound of Patricia's nervous fidgeting with her jewelry. I also learned that sometimes the most profound relationships develop in the most unexpected circumstances, that true family is defined not by genetics, but by choice, by the decision to care for someone without expectation of reward. Michael stood up abruptly. Where is this going? What is Father trying to say? During my illness, I was cared for by Maria Santos, a woman who came into my life as a professional caregiver, but who became something far more precious, a true companion, a genuine friend, a daughter of the heart. All eyes turned to me, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and confusion. Theodore had never spoken to me about being anything more than his caregiver, had never suggested that our relationship was anything other than professional. Maria sat with me through sleepless nights when pain made rest impossible. She read to me when my eyes grew too weak to see the words myself. She listened to my stories, my regrets, my fears about leaving this world alone. She treated me not as a burden or an obligation, but as a human being worthy of dignity and respect. Jonathan's face was growing red with what looked like anger or disbelief. This is ridiculous. Father was obviously manipulated by this woman. She took advantage of his illness, his loneliness. Please let me finish, Whitmore said firmly. Theodore was very thorough in his explanations. More importantly, Maria asked for nothing in return. She never inquired about my will, never suggested that her care might be rewarded financially, never treated me as anything other than a person who needed help. Her compassion was pure, uncontaminated by self-interest or expectation of gain. I thought about all those evenings when Theodore would tell me about his youth, his business ventures, his late wife whom he'd loved deeply. I'd listened because I genuinely enjoyed his stories, because he was intelligent and funny and had lived a fascinating life. I'd never considered that he might interpret my interest as anything more than professional courtesy. In contrast, Whitmore continued, my own family visited me out of duty rather than desire, called me out of obligation rather than affection, included me in their lives because they felt they should rather than because they wanted to. That's not fair, Patricia protested. We have our own lives, our own responsibilities. We couldn't be here every day. I don't blame my family for their absence during my illness. Whitmore read, they have their own concerns, their own discomfort with aging and death. But I also cannot ignore the reality of who was present when I needed care, who showed up day after day without complaint or expectation of reward. The room fell silent as the implications of Theodore's words began to sink in. I sat frozen in my chair, beginning to understand that this will reading was not going to unfold as any of us had expected. Mr. Whitmore, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Mr. Ashford never discussed his will with me. I had no idea he was considering. Whatever this is, Whitmore's expression was kind but serious. Maria, Theodore was very clear that you were not to know about his intentions until after his death. He was concerned that knowledge of the will might change the nature of your relationship. Around the table, the Ashford family was beginning to look genuinely alarmed, perhaps sensing that their assumptions about Theodore's estate were about to be challenged in ways they'd never imagined. "Shall we continue?" Whitmore asked, though it wasn't really a question. We all nodded, though none of us looked ready for whatever revelation was coming next. Whitmore turned to a new section of the will, his expression growing more serious as he prepared to deliver what I sensed would be shocking news. The Ashford family leaned forward in their chairs, their earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety. "Now we come to the distribution of Theodore's primary assets," Whitmore said. "The family home, the business interests, and the bulk of his investment portfolio." Jonathan gripped the arms of his chair. "Finally, I assume the house goes to the family to be shared among the children." "Actually," Whitmore replied. Consulting the document, Theodore left the family home at 1247 Beacon Hill to Maria Santos, along with all furnishings and personal effects contained therein. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Patricia gasped audibly, and Michael's face went white with shock. I felt as if the air had been sucked from my lungs, as if Whitmore had announced something impossible. "That's not possible," Jonathan said, his voice rising. "That house has been in our family for 3 generations. It's worth $5 million. "There's more," Whitmore continued, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. Theodore also left to Maria his controlling interest in Ashford Industries, including all subsidiary companies and real estate holdings. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward, clattering against the hardwood floor. "This is insane," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You're telling us that our father left his entire business empire to his nurse, to someone he knew for 3 years. Whitmore consulted his notes. The business interests are valued at approximately $42 million. Combined with the house and other assets, Maria's inheritance totals just over $47 million. $47 million. The number seemed to echo in the room, impossible and overwhelming. I stared at Whitmore, certain I had misheard, certain this was some kind of elaborate mistake. "There has to be an error," Patricia said, her voice tight with panic. "Theodore would never have done this. He was ill, confused, obviously manipulated by this woman." "I can assure you, there is no error," Whitmore replied. "Theodore spent months crafting this will, consulting with multiple attorneys, having his mental capacity evaluated repeatedly. He was very clear about his intentions." Jonathan turned to face me, his eyes blazing with fury. "What did you do to him? How did you convince a sick old man to give you everything? What kind of hold did you have over my father?" I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "I didn't do anything, I just took care of him. I had no idea he was planning this. Just took care of him." Michael's voice was sharp with disbelief. "For $47 million, that's the most expensive nursing care in history." "I never asked for money," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I never even thought about his will. I was paid a salary, and that was enough for me." Whitmore cleared his throat. Theodore anticipated these reactions, which is why he left detailed explanations for his decisions. Perhaps it would be helpful to read those as well. He pulled out another document, this one handwritten in Theodore's familiar script. Theodore wrote, "I know my family will be shocked and perhaps angered by my decisions. They will claim that Maria manipulated me, that she took advantage of my illness to secure financial gain. This accusation would be deeply unfair to a woman who never asked for anything beyond her agreed-upon salary." Patricia was crying now, not the dignified tears of grief, but the raw sobs of someone whose world was collapsing. How could he do this to us? How could he give away our inheritance to a stranger? Whitmore continued reading. "The truth is that Maria gave me something my family could not or would not provide. She gave me her time, her attention, her genuine care. She made my final years bearable, even meaningful, in ways that no amount of duty visits or obligatory phone calls could match." "We visited him," Jonathan protested. "We called him regularly. We included him in family gatherings." My family visited me out of obligation. Whitmore read, called me because they felt they should, included me in their lives because it was expected. Maria included me in her life because she wanted to, because she saw value in an old man's company. Because she treated me like family when my actual family treated me like a burden. I thought about all those evenings when Theodore would ask me to stay after my shift ended. When we'd sit in his study talking about books or current events or his memories of building his business from nothing, I'd stayed because I enjoyed his company, because he was intelligent and funny and had fascinating stories to tell. I want to be clear, Whitmore continued, that I do not blame my family for their absence during my illness. They have their own lives, their own responsibilities, their own discomfort with aging and death. But I also cannot ignore the reality of who was present when I needed care. Who showed up day after day without complaint or expectation of reward. Michael returned to his chair, his face pale with shock and growing understanding. Even if everything he says is true, even if she was kind to him, that doesn't justify giving her everything. We're his children. We're his blood. Blood creates obligation, Whitmore read, but it does not guarantee love. Legal relationships create duty, but they do not ensure compassion. Maria became my family, not through birth or marriage, but through choice, her choice to care for me, and my choice to love her as the daughter I wish I had been blessed with. The words hit me like a revelation. Theodore had never spoken to me about feeling like a father figure, had never suggested that our relationship was anything more than professional. But looking back, I could see the signs, the way he'd asked about my family, my dreams, my plans for the future. The way he'd insisted on helping me with my English when I struggled with complex medical terminology. The way he'd made me feel like I belonged in his house, in his life. There's more, Whitmore said, turning to another page. Theodore left a personal letter for Maria to be read aloud to everyone present. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Theodore's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, aware of the Ashford family's eyes on me, their mixture of rage and disbelief and desperate curiosity. My dear Maria, I read aloud, my voice shaking. If you are reading this, then you have just learned that I have left you my home, my business, and the bulk of my estate. I imagine you are as shocked as my family, perhaps even more so. Since I never discussed my intentions with you, I paused, looking up at the faces around the table. Jonathan was staring at me with undisguised hatred, while Patricia continued to cry quietly into her handkerchief. I want you to understand that this gift is not payment for services rendered, nor is it the whim of a lonely old man. It is a recognition of something far more valuable than money. It is a recognition of love freely given, of compassion offered without expectation of return, of dignity preserved in the face of illness and death. My voice broke on the last words. Remembering all the times Theodore had thanked me for treating him like a person rather than a patient, for seeing him as Theodore the man rather than Theodore the invalid. You gave me something my family could not. I continued reading. You gave me your heart, your time, your genuine care and affection. You made my final years meaningful rather than just endurable. You treated me like a person worth loving rather than a duty to be discharged. This is emotional manipulation, Jonathan said, his voice cold with rage. He's making us sound like monsters for having our own lives. I know my family will be angry. I read, and I understand their anger. But I hope that in time they will come to understand that love should be rewarded, that kindness should be recognized, that the people who truly care for us should be the ones who benefit from our success. Whitmore took back the letter and consulted his notes. There are some additional provisions. Theodore established a trust fund for family members who might experience financial hardship, and he left specific instructions about maintaining family burial plots and memorial funds. How generous, Michael said bitterly. He gives away our inheritance and then sets up a charity fund to help us cope with poverty. The trust fund is substantial, Whitmore clarified. $5 million, to be administered by Maria according to Theodore's guidelines. All eyes turned to me again, and I realized that I wasn't just inheriting Theodore's wealth. I was inheriting responsibility for his family's financial welfare, becoming the person they would have to ask for help if they needed it. "There's one final section," Whitmore said, "but perhaps we should take a break before continuing. This has been a lot to process." "No," Jonathan said firmly. "I want to hear everything. I want to understand the full scope of what our father has done to this family." Whitmore nodded and turned to the last page of the will. The page that would complete Theodore's final revelation and change everything we thought we knew about his life, his death, and his legacy. "Very well," he said. "Let's finish this." Whitmore turned to the final section of the will, his expression growing even more serious as he prepared to deliver what I sensed would be the most shocking revelation yet. The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with the weight of family fury and my own overwhelming confusion. "Before we read the final provisions," Whitmore said, "I need to provide some context that Theodore felt was essential for understanding his decisions." He pulled out a sealed envelope marked "Personal History" to be opened only upon my death. Theodore left specific instructions that this information should be shared with all beneficiaries to help them understand the full scope of his relationship with Maria. Jonathan leaned forward aggressively. What kind of context could possibly justify giving $47 million to a nurse? The kind of context, Whitmore said carefully, that reveals Maria is not just Theodore's caregiver, but also his biological daughter. The words hit the room like a bomb exploding. Patricia's crying stopped abruptly, replaced by stunned silence. Michael's face went from red with anger to white with shock. Jonathan's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish gasping for air. I felt the world tilt around me, felt my carefully constructed understanding of my life crumble into pieces. "That's impossible," I whispered. "My father died when I was a baby. My mother told me he died in an accident in Mexico." Whitmore opened the envelope and withdrew several documents: birth certificates, DNA test results, private investigator reports. "Theodore hired investigators 3 years ago when he first met you. Something about your appearance, your mannerisms, reminded him of someone from his past. He handed me a photograph that made my breath catch. It showed a young woman who looked exactly like me standing next to a much younger Theodore. They were both smiling, and she was clearly pregnant. Your mother, Isabella Santos," Whitmore said gently. "Theodore met her in 1985 when he was expanding his business into Mexico. They had a brief relationship and she became pregnant." I stared at the photograph, seeing my mother's face as I'd never seen it before, young, happy, in love. "She never told me," I said, my voice barely audible. "She never said anything about knowing him." According to Theodore's account, Whitmore continued, "Isabella left Mexico suddenly. Without telling him about the pregnancy, he tried to find her, but she had disappeared completely. He assumed she had decided not to continue the relationship." Jonathan found his voice, though it came out strangled. "You're saying this woman is our half-sister? That father had an illegitimate child he never told us about?" "Theodore only learned about Maria's existence 3 years ago," Whitmore explained. "When he hired her as his caregiver, something about her seemed familiar. He had DNA tests run secretly, using hair from her brush, and confirmed that she was his daughter. The DNA results were spread across the table. Scientific proof of a relationship I'd never suspected. I thought about all those times Theodore had asked about my family, about my mother's life in Mexico, about my childhood. I'd thought he was just being kind, showing interest in his caregiver's background. He knew," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "For 3 years, he knew I was his daughter, and he never said anything." "Theodore struggled with whether to tell you," Whitmore said. "He was afraid you might think he'd hired you because of the relationship, that you might feel obligated to care for him out of family duty rather than professional choice." Patricia had stopped crying and was staring at me with a mixture of shock and something that might have been recognition. "The eyes," she said suddenly. "You have Theodore's eyes. I should have noticed. I thought about my mother. about the stories she'd told me about my father, that he'd been a good man who'd died too young, that he would have loved me if he'd had the chance to know me. She'd never mentioned that he was wealthy, that he was American, that he was alive and living just a few hundred miles away. Why didn't she tell him? I asked. Why didn't she tell me? Whitmore consulted Theodore's letter. According to what Theodore learned from his investigators, your mother was very young when they met, only 19. She was working as a translator for his business dealings. When she realized she was pregnant, she also learned that Theodore was married. The revelation hit me like another blow. Theodore had been married when he'd had an affair with my mother, had been a family man with children when he'd created another child he'd never known about. My first wife, Margaret, was still alive then, Jonathan said quietly. They didn't divorce until 1987. Your mother apparently decided she didn't want to be the other woman. Whitmore continued. She left Mexico and came to the United States, where she raised you as a single mother. She never contacted Theodore, never asked for support, never revealed that she'd had his child. I thought about my mother's struggles, about the long hours she'd worked as a housekeeper and nanny to support us, about the times we'd gone without things we needed because money was tight. All the while, my biological father had been building a business empire, accumulating wealth that could have made our lives so much easier. She died without ever telling me the truth, I said, feeling a grief that was different from the sorrow I'd felt at her funeral 2 years ago. This was grief for lost opportunities, for relationships that might have been for a father I'd never known I had. Theodore was devastated when he learned about your mother's death, Whitmore said. He felt guilty for not trying harder to find her, for not being there when she needed support, for missing your entire childhood. Michael was staring at the DNA results as if they might change if he looked at them long enough. So she really is our sister, our half-sister. Which explains, Whitmore said, why Theodore felt justified in leaving her the bulk of his estate. In his mind, he was simply providing for his daughter, giving her the inheritance she should have received all along. Jonathan's anger seemed to have transformed into something more complex. Grief, perhaps, or a reluctant understanding. He never told us he'd had an affair, never mentioned having another child. Theodore was ashamed of the affair, Whitmore explained. He felt he'd betrayed your mother's memory by having a relationship with Isabella. When Isabella disappeared, he convinced himself it was for the best, that he could pretend it had never happened. I looked around the table at these people, who were apparently my half-siblings. These strangers who shared my blood and my grief, and my shock at learning that our father had kept such enormous secrets. There's one more thing, Whitmore said, pulling out a final letter. Theodore left this for Maria, to be read only after she learned the truth about their relationship with trembling hands. I opened the letter and began to read aloud. My dear daughter, and yes, I can finally call you that. If you are reading this, then you know the truth about who you are, about who I am, about the relationship we shared without either of us fully understanding it. I want you to know that discovering you were my daughter was the greatest gift of my final years. For 3 years, I had the privilege of knowing you, of watching you work, of seeing the kind, compassionate woman you had become, despite growing up without a father. Your mother raised you to be everything I could have hoped for in a daughter: intelligent, caring, hardworking, genuine. You have her beauty and her strength, but you also have qualities that I recognize as my own determination. Curiosity, the ability to see potential where others see only problems. I know you will be shocked by this inheritance, will feel it's too much, will worry about taking what should belong to Jonathan and Michael, but please understand that this is not charity or guilt. This is a father providing for his daughter, giving her the security and opportunities she should have had from birth. You are not just my caregiver who happened to be kind to me. You are my child, my blood, my legacy in the truest sense. The business I built, the wealth I accumulated, it all means more knowing that it will go to someone who shares my DNA and my values. I'm sorry I never told you the truth while I was alive. I was afraid it would change things between us, afraid you might feel obligated to love me because I was your father, rather than choosing to care for me because of who I was as a person. But you did love me, didn't you? In your own way, you gave me the relationship I'd always hoped to have with a daughter, respectful but warm, caring but not dependent, genuine and unforced. I hope you can forgive me for keeping this secret, for robbing us both of the chance to know each other as father and daughter. I hope you can forgive your mother for her silence, understanding that she was trying to protect both of us from a complicated situation. Most of all, I hope you will use this inheritance to build the life you deserve, the life your mother wanted for you but couldn't provide. You are my daughter, Maria Santos Ashford, and I am proud of the woman you have become. I folded the letter carefully, my eyes blurred with tears. Around the table, my half-siblings sat in stunned silence, processing the revelation that had changed everything about this family gathering. "So," Patricia said finally, her voice small and uncertain. "What happens now? How do we move forward from this?" It was a question none of us could answer, a challenge that would require us to rebuild our understanding of family inheritance and the complicated legacy of a man who had kept secrets that changed everything. But for the first time since entering this conference room, I felt like I belonged here, not as the caregiver who'd been given an unexpected gift, but as Theodore Ashford's daughter, claiming my rightful place in his family and his legacy. The silence in the conference room stretched on, heavy with the weight of revelation and the complexity of emotions none of us had been prepared to face. I sat holding Theodore's letter, this final message from a father I'd never known I had, while my half-siblings struggled to process the reality that their family had just grown by one member. "I need some air," Michael said suddenly, standing and walking to the window. This is too much to process." Jonathan remained seated, but his earlier anger had been replaced by something more complicated, a mixture of grief, confusion, and what might have been the beginning of acceptance. "Maria," he said, using my name for the first time since I'd entered the room, "I owe you an apology. When I didn't know who you really were, I said some terrible things." "You didn't know," I replied quietly. "None of us knew." Patricia had stopped crying and was studying me with new eyes, perhaps looking for family resemblances she'd missed before. "You have his hands," she said suddenly. "Theodore's hands? Long fingers? The same way of gesturing when you talk." I looked down at my hands, seeing them differently now, wondering what other traits I'd inherited from a father I'd cared for without knowing he was my father. "This explains so much," Michael said from the window. "The way father looked at you sometimes, the way he insisted on having you stay for dinner when we visited, the way he talked about you. We thought he was just fond of his caregiver, but he was proud of his daughter." The realization hit me like a wave of grief and joy combined. All those evenings when Theodore had asked me to join him for meals, all those times he'd introduced me to visitors as my dear friend Maria, all those moments when I'd caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. He'd been a father, getting to know his daughter, treasuring time with a child he'd thought he'd lost forever. "Mr. Whitmore," I said, "there's something I need to understand. If Theodore knew I was his daughter for 3 years, why didn't he change his will sooner? Why wait until the end?" Whitmore consulted his notes. According to Theodore's records, he actually revised his will multiple times over the past 3 years. Each revision increased your inheritance as he became more certain of his feelings, more convinced that you deserved to be treated as his daughter rather than just his caregiver. He pulled out a timeline showing the evolution of Theodore's will. Initially, he left you a modest bequest, $50,000. 6 months later, he increased it to $500,000. A year ago, he left you the house. The final revision, completed just 2 months before his death, included the business interests. He was testing himself, Jonathan said with sudden understanding, making sure his feelings were real, that he wasn't just being sentimental about finding his lost daughter. "Exactly," Whitmore confirmed. Theodore was a careful man. He wanted to be certain that his decision to treat you as his daughter was based on genuine relationship, not just biological connection. I thought about those final months, about how Theodore had seemed more relaxed, more at peace. He'd started asking me more personal questions about my dreams, my plans for the future, my thoughts about family and legacy. I'd assumed he was just making conversation, but he'd been trying to understand the daughter he'd finally found. "There's something else you should know," Whitmore said, pulling out another document. Theodore left detailed instructions about how he wanted the family business to be managed. "Maria, he didn't just leave you ownership, he left you a comprehensive plan for leadership transition." The business plan was thick and detailed, showing Theodore's thoughts about company direction, key personnel, strategic initiatives. It was clear he'd spent enormous time and energy preparing me to inherit not just his wealth, but his life's work. "He was grooming you," Patricia said, her voice filled with wonder. "All those times he had you sit in on business calls. All those conversations about company operations, he was training you to take over." I remembered those conversations differently now. Theodore had often asked my opinion about business decisions, had explained complex financial concepts to me, had included me in discussions with his managers and advisors. I'd thought he was just being kind, including his caregiver in his daily activities. But he'd been preparing his daughter to inherit his empire. "The question now," Michael said, returning to the table, "is what happens to this family? Do we accept Maria as our sister? Do we fight the will? Do we try to find some middle ground?" Jonathan looked at me directly. "Maria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did you know? Even suspect? Was there any part of you that wondered about the connection?" I considered the question carefully, thinking back over 3 years of caring for Theodore. "Sometimes," I said slowly, "I felt like he was more interested in me than a typical employer would be. He asked a lot of questions about my family, my background, my mother's life in Mexico, but I thought he was just being kind, showing interest in his caregiver's life, and the resemblance." Patricia asked, "Did anyone ever comment on how much you looked like him?" "A few people mentioned it," I admitted. "Neighbors, visitors, but people see resemblances everywhere. I never thought it meant anything." Whitmore cleared his throat. "There's one more provision in Theodore's will that addresses the family dynamics. He established what he called a family integration fund, money specifically set aside to help all of you adjust to this new reality." "What kind of fund?" Michael asked. "Theodore allocated $2 million for family counseling, legal fees if anyone chooses to contest the will, and what he called relationship-building activities. He hoped you might use it to get to know each other, to build the kind of family relationships he'd always wanted." The gesture was so typically Theodore, practicable, generous, and optimistic about human nature. Even in death, he was trying to solve problems, to bring people together, to create the family harmony that had eluded him in life. "He really thought this through," Jonathan said, shaking his head in amazement. "Every angle, every possible reaction, every way this could unfold." Theodore was a planner, Whitmore agreed. But more than that, he was hopeful. He believed that love and truth would ultimately triumph over anger and resentment. I looked around the table at these people who were my half-siblings, wondering if Theodore's optimism was justified. Could we build real relationships from this foundation of shock and revelation? Could we become a family despite the circumstances that had brought us together? "I have a proposal," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "I know this inheritance is overwhelming, and I know it seems unfair that someone you barely knew is inheriting what you expected to receive. You're our sister," Patricia said firmly. "You're not someone we barely know, you're family we just discovered." "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "But I also understand that this is a lot to process. And I don't want Theodore's gift to tear apart what's left of his family." I took a deep breath, making a decision that felt both terrifying and right. What if we shared it? Not equally, necessarily, but in a way that honors both Theodore's wishes and your legitimate expectations as his children. Jonathan leaned forward with interest. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we work together to manage Theodore's legacy. You know the business, you understand the family history, you have relationships with employees and clients that I don't have. I have Theodore's trust and his detailed plans, but I need your experience and knowledge. Michael nodded slowly. A partnership rather than a takeover. Exactly. We honor Theodore's will by keeping me as the primary heir, but we honor his family by making sure everyone benefits from his success. Whitmore was taking notes, clearly intrigued by the direction of our conversation. This is exactly the kind of solution Theodore hoped you might reach. He believed that his family was capable of rising above their initial reactions to find common ground. It won't be easy, Patricia warned. There's a lot of hurt here, a lot of shock and adjustment. Building real relationships takes time. We have time, I said. And we have Theodore's example of what it means to care for family, even when that family comes in unexpected forms. As we prepared to leave the conference room, I realized that my life had been divided into distinct chapters before I knew Theodore, while I cared for him without knowing he was my father, and now as his daughter and heir. But more than that, I was beginning to understand that Theodore's greatest gift wasn't the money or the business or the house. It was the opportunity to discover family in the most unexpected place, to build relationships based on choice rather than obligation, to create the kind of love that transcends blood and law and social expectation. There's one more thing, Whitmore said as we gathered our belongings. Theodore left a final message to be delivered only if his family chose to work together rather than fight over his estate. He handed me a sealed envelope marked, "For my children, if they choose love over law." I looked at Jonathan, Michael, and Patricia, my half-siblings, my new family, the people who would help me carry forward Theodore's legacy. "Should we read it together?" I asked. They nodded, and I opened the envelope, ready to hear my father's final words about the family he'd always dreamed of having, the family we were finally ready to become. 6 months later, I stood in Theodore's study, our father's study, looking out at the garden where he'd spent so many peaceful mornings in his final years. The room felt different now, filled with the energy of family meetings and business discussions, alive with the voices of siblings learning to work together. "Maria, the quarterly reports are ready for review," Jonathan called from the conference table we'd installed near the window. He'd taken on the role of chief financial officer, bringing his decades of business experience to help me understand the complexities of running Ashford Industries. "And the new caregiver training program is ready to launch," Patricia added, looking up from her laptop. She'd thrown herself into developing the Theodore Ashford Foundation for caregiver support, using her background in nonprofit management to create something meaningful from our father's wealth. Michael entered the study carrying coffee for everyone, a ritual that had developed during our weekly family business meetings. "The Phoenix division is showing strong growth," he reported. "Dad's expansion plans are working exactly as he predicted." It had taken months to reach this point. Months of difficult conversations and gradual trust building. Months of learning to see each other as family rather than competitors for their father's affection. But Theodore's final letter had shown us the way forward, had given us a roadmap for becoming the family he'd always hoped we could be. I opened the letter we'd read together that day in Whitmore's office. The words, now familiar but still powerful. "My dear children, and yes, I can finally call you all that if you are reading this together. Then you have chosen love over law, relationship over resentment, family over finance. You have proven that my faith in you was justified. I know this situation has been difficult for all of you. Jonathan, Michael, you have had to accept that your father kept enormous secrets, that he had another child he never told you about. Patricia, you have had to welcome a stranger into your family to share your husband's inheritance with someone you barely knew. Maria, you have had to discover that your entire understanding of your identity was incomplete, that the man you cared for was not just your employer, but your father, that you are not alone in the world, but part of a larger family. These adjustments would challenge any family, but you have risen to meet them with grace and generosity. You have chosen to see opportunity rather than obstacle, to build bridges rather than walls. I want you to know that watching you work together over these past months, yes, I have been watching. Through the reports from Whitmore and the updates from the business managers has been the greatest joy of my afterlife, if such a thing exists. You have created exactly the kind of family I always dreamed of having. A family based on choice rather than obligation, on mutual respect rather than mere blood relation, on shared purpose rather than shared genetics alone. Maria, you have proven yourself to be not just my biological daughter, but my spiritual heir. Someone who understands that wealth is meaningless unless it's used to help others. That business success is hollow unless it's built on genuine relationships. Jonathan and Michael, you have shown that true maturity means accepting change with grace. That real strength means supporting others, even when it's difficult. That family loyalty means embracing new members rather than excluding them. Patricia, you have demonstrated that love can expand to include unexpected people. That generosity of spirit is more valuable than any inheritance. That building bridges is more important than protecting territory. Together, you are managing my business better than I ever did alone. You are using my wealth more wisely than I ever imagined possible. You are creating the kind of legacy I always hoped for, but never quite achieved. The Theodore Ashford Foundation for Caregiver Support will help thousands of families navigate the challenges of caring for aging loved ones. The business expansion into employee wellness programs will improve the lives of workers across multiple industries. The family integration initiatives will serve as a model for other families facing similar challenges. But more than any of these accomplishments, you have proven that family is not about blood or law or inheritance. Family is about showing up for each other, about choosing to care, about building something together that is greater than what any of you could create alone. I am proud of all of you. I am grateful for the time I had with each of you. I am hopeful about the future you will build together. Live well, love deeply. And remember that the greatest inheritance is not money, but the capacity to see the best in each other and to build something beautiful from that vision. Your father, Theodore Ashford. I folded the letter and looked around the study at my siblings because that's what they had become. Truly and completely. We'd moved beyond the initial shock and resentment to build something real, something Theodore would have been proud of. The Caregiver Certification Program graduated its first class last week, Patricia reported. 25 new caregivers, all trained in both professional skills and emotional support techniques, and the Employee Wellness Initiative is being adopted by 3 more companies, Michael added. Dad's vision of treating workers like family is actually becoming profitable. Jonathan smiled, something that had taken months to develop but now came naturally. He would have loved that, doing good and doing well at the same time. A knock at the study door interrupted our meeting. Whitmore entered, carrying a manila envelope that looked official and important. I have some news, he said, settling into the chair we designated as his during these family meetings. The DNA testing company that processed Theodore's original tests has contacted me. They've found another match in their database. The room fell silent. We'd grown comfortable as a family of 4, had learned to navigate the dynamics of 3 siblings and 1 half-sister. The possibility of another family member was both exciting and daunting. Another child? I asked. A grandchild, Whitmore clarified. Apparently, Theodore had another relationship years ago, before he met your mother, Maria. That woman had a son who recently submitted DNA for genealogy research. We looked at each other, processing this new information. Our family, which had seemed complete, was apparently still growing. What do we do? Michael asked. We do what Theodore would have done, Patricia said firmly. We reach out. We welcome him. We share what we've learned about building family from unexpected circumstances. I thought about Theodore's letter, about his belief that family is about choice rather than blood, about showing up for each other even when it's difficult. Patricia's right, I said. We've learned how to be a family. Now we get to teach someone else. Jonathan nodded. Besides, we've got the foundation running smoothly. The business is growing, and we've figured out how to work together. We can handle 1 more family member. Actually, Whitmore said with a slight smile, there might be 2 more. The young man who contacted the DNA company mentioned that his mother had always wondered about his father's family. She's still alive, and she's interested in meeting all of you. 2 more family members. Theodore's legacy continued to expand, continued to surprise us, continued to challenge us, to grow beyond our assumptions about what family could be. Well, I said, looking around at my siblings, I guess we'd better order a bigger conference table. As we planned for reaching out to these new family members, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. 6 months ago, I'd been a caregiver, sitting in the back of a conference room, invisible and unimportant. Now, I was the CEO of a major corporation, the founder of a charitable foundation, and most importantly, a daughter and sister in a family that had chosen to love each other despite the complicated circumstances of our discovery. Theodore had been right about so many things, but most of all, he'd been right about the power of love to transform impossible situations into opportunities for growth and connection. The last page of his will had revealed more than just my inheritance. It had revealed the possibility of becoming the family he'd always dreamed of having, the family we'd chosen to become. As the afternoon sun streamed through the study windows, illuminating the faces of my siblings as we planned for our expanding family, I felt Theodore's presence in the room, not as a ghost or a memory, but as the foundation upon which we'd built something beautiful and lasting. We were his legacy, all of us, and we were just getting started.